Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, President Felipe Calderon. It's great to be here. You're here because you want to do something about climate change. Most people in the world actually do want to do something about climate change. Most heads of state and government would like to be helpful on climate change. Most presidents and CEOs of corporations would. But many people in the world think, well, it would be good to act on climate change, but it's rather expensive. And we don't really have the luxury of taking tough actions today. And that's why, just over a year ago, the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate was set up under President Felipe Calderon. It's a great honor to have him here. Last month, the report was launched, Better Growth, Better Climate, asking the question, is it possible to go from where we are today in a high-carbon, low-efficiency world economy to where we need to go to, which is a low-carbon, high-efficiency world economy? And is it possible to get a trajectory between here and there that actually promotes more growth, more technology, more competitiveness, more jobs, and so on? So good morning to you all. My name's Andrew Steer. I'm the president and the CEO of the World Resources Institute. It's been a very great honor for us to be the managing partner for this process, but it's been actually run as a worldwide process, a global commission, a team, a group of world-class economists, and 7 countries which have sponsored it. I'd like now to invite President Felipe Calderon to come and address you, and then following that, we'll actually have a presentation of the United States deep dive version of this report, which has been led by Nicholas Bianco of the World Resources Institute. But President Calderon is going to speak about the global story. As you know, when he was president of Mexico, he made green growth a hallmark of his administration. Remarkable changes were taken to policies and throughout the economy to really green Mexico's growth. And when he was in charge of the G20 meeting, green growth was put as a centerpiece of that. So nobody could be better equipped than President Calderon. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Andrew, Chad Holiday, fellow commissioner, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, and welcome to the launch of the new Climate Economy Report, Better Growth, Better Climate, here in Washington, D.C., at the political heart of this nation. In this occasion, we testify additionally the launching event of the case study, Seeing is Believing, creating a new climate economy in the United States. Special research that has been made possible thanks to the hard work of the World Resources Institute, and I thank you all for being here in such an important occasion. I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to all my fellow commissioners, as well as the various countries that have supported and participated in this work. And of course, thank you, Andrew Steer, because due to the hard work of the World Resources Institute, this effort could be possible. As we all know, recently the IPCC report came to reassure with its strong scientific evidence the facts that we all know. Climate change and global warming, which is associated with it, are a reality. In the last century, land and sea temperatures are rising, and so is the level of the sea. The IPCC report demonstrated that global warming is highly correlated with the greenhouse gases emissions caused by human activity in the industrial era. The last 3 decades have been the hottest in history, one after the other, particularly in the northern hemisphere. Like many other countries, the U.S. is suffering from more frequent and more intense weather and climate events. It is already having an impact in the U.S. economy. The Texas heat wave of 2011 cost an estimated of $5 billion. New York has suffered one of the coldest winters in a century, and California the worst droughts ever. Recently, the risky business project, whose commission was co-chaired by former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg and former Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, also warns about the clear and pressing risk of climate change to the Americans. They say, for instance, that the increase in temperatures could cost to the American consumers up to $12 billion a year in additional energy costs. Beyond the debate about if all these phenomena are a direct consequence of climate change or not, clearly, those are the kind of events that we will see with surprising frequency if we don't act today. In brief, in our opinion, science has rested its case. Climate change is a real and is a growing threat to humankind. With such clear evidence, the solution should appear obvious. We need to reduce our carbon emission. But if the evidence is so clear, why haven't we acted? Why have government and business leaders done so little to reduce climate risk? The real problem, we think, is that there is a widespread perception that taking action on climate implies huge economic costs. Therefore, there is a common belief that we have to choose between economic growth and mitigating climate risk. Right now, many countries are recovering from the worst economic crisis since the 1930s and are rightly focused on achieving sustained prosperity and reducing inequality. So the question for those countries is, can we get economic growth and tackle climate risk at the same time? With a mandate to answer these specific questions, the Global Commissions on the Economy and Climate set out 1 year ago with the best and brightest minds. We conducted one of the most comprehensive economic analyses ever done on this subject. Almost 100 institutions worldwide contributed, and now, after a year of hard work, we reach a clear conclusion. Yes, it is possible to have better growth and a better climate. Yes, it is possible to create jobs and reduce poverty, and at the same time reduce the carbon emissions that threaten our future. Yes, it is possible, but we need to make some fundamental changes and smart choices today. The report proposes that we should focus on 3 key systems that are critical for growth and climate action: energy, cities, and land uses. In terms of energy, our report estimates that from now until 2030, world energy demands could grow by 1/3. We do not suggest that we must or we can decouple economic growth from energy demand. What we are saying is that we must decouple economic growth from carbon emissions by changing the way we produce energy and the way we consume energy. There are hundreds of examples of things that we can do. For instance, in saving energy, when I was in office, we implemented programs to substitute 2 million of appliances and almost 50 million light bulbs, the largest program in the world. I believe governments and companies around the world can find these types of opportunities that generate economic savings for consumers and reduce emissions at the same time. On the other hand, the cost of renewable energy is coming down dramatically. And today, the cost of renewable energy is equal or even cheaper than fossil fuels in several countries and in several regions in the world, and even in this country. Second, in terms of our cities, the report estimates, again, in the landscape and the horizon in the next 15 years, the report estimates that by 2030, 1 billion additional people will live in urban areas. What is that? That is equivalent of building one city like this, one city like Washington, D.C., every single month during the next 15 years. The current model of sprawling cities with low density and more oriented to individual vehicles is not longer viable. We need another model, another that is based on mass transport systems and more human proximity. We know that this implies tremendous efforts to change public policies. We need to improve and extend public transport means and to reduce traffic congestions and local air pollution. So we need connected, coordinated, and compact cities. And connected, coordinated, and compact cities are better cities and generate not only better climate, but also they are more productive, which means they generate better growth as well. And of course, a higher quality of life for the people. And finally, in terms of land use, our agricultural and forest system are coming under tremendous pressure because of rapid population growth and competing land uses. By 2030, in the next 15 years, we will need to feed over 8 billion people and feed them in a better way. We need to produce that food in the same or even lower surface for production. Yet over 1/4 of agricultural lands today are severely degraded, so they are not producing the crops they could. We have to improve the use of our land by increasing agricultural productivity while protecting and restoring natural environments. We need to create and finance a new green revolution that allow us to satisfy the growing demand for food while avoiding the destruction of natural habitats, especially rainforests. At the same time, we need to stop deforestation in the next years, and the only way to do that is by providing economic income and alternatives to the poorest families, in particular indigenous communities that live there. The window to take action is closing fast. But at the same time, technological changes, the power of innovations, and increased awareness about the problem are providing us with better chances than ever before. New generations are pushing so hard to take actions in order to preserve the earth, our common house. We have now more reasons to say this is the time to act. But our arguments go beyond the consequences of climate change themselves. We don't want to talk too much about the catastrophic prophecies behind this problem. We want to talk about the promised land of better economic growth and development. Indeed, we conclude that the investment and productivity that is needed in order to break the impasse of the economy could come from taking action precisely in this matter. Indeed, we consider that if we follow our global action plan, we will activate 3 big drivers of economic growth. These drivers are investment in infrastructure, productivity of natural resources, and innovation. By making explicit the real economic value of natural resources, starting by phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, we can increase productivity. We like to talk so much about the productivity of labor force or capital, and that is good, it's right. However, it is time to talk about the productivity of natural resources as well. By using them in a smarter way, we can foster the economy. Second, we need to invest in low-carbon infrastructure. We estimate that the world will invest around $90 trillion in the next 15 years in infrastructure in the fields for cities, energy, and land use. How we choose to invest these resources will determine if we get locked into a carbon-intense future or we are able to follow a low-carbon path. The choice is ours. So in other words, if we are going to invest $90 trillion one way or another, let's do it in the right way. Invest in low-carbon infrastructure instead of the current carbon-intensive one. Third, innovation. Innovation has been the big driver of advance in human history. Advances in technology generated the industrial revolutions, and we believe technology can now help us to create a new revolution, this time towards a low-carbon economy. With strong economic signals coming from the right public policies, it is possible to get it. On top of that, and finally, taking action collectively with clear and consistent policy signals will provide the certainty in the medium and long term that most companies need to take action. The current uncertainty and hesitations of coming from governments and congresses is preventing the investment that companies are able to do in the right direction. The lack of political willingness is the cause of this wait-and-see strategy that increases the financial cost and reduces the scale that this positive change needs. If we put in place our recommendations, there will be important benefits and profits for first movers and will generate the scale that is needed. Many companies and governments are already showing us that it is indeed possible to generate growth and reduce climate risk at the same time. As part of the global report, we published a 10-point global action plan for government and businesses. However, there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Individual economies need a specific solution. That is why we have commissioned in-country studies for some select countries, including China, India, Brazil, Ethiopia, and the United States. In the case study that we present today, Seeing is Believing, we provide recommendations specifically tailored for the United States and the American economy. We know that the US is an important part of the problem, emitting almost 1/5 of global greenhouse gases. However, the US is also the key part of the solution. As the report shows, we are beginning to see wide-ranging signals that the US economy is already reducing its level of emissions, mainly due to technological changes that are happening in energy sectors, among others. That could be an important tool to phase out the use of coal, which is a necessary step to get better climate and better growth. At the same time, these changes could give us the transitional path towards a new era of renewable energy. We see great examples of innovation in this country, which are allowing the production of energy in a cleaner and cheaper way. The price of renewables is falling, while innovation is allowing the consumption of energy in a smarter way. This is true of cars, trucks, light bulbs, and a whole range of consumer products. This innovation helps mitigate climate risk and at the same time creates well-paid jobs and stimulates the economy. We have reached a limit. We have a great responsibility to save our common home. But today, we have economic alternatives. With this report, we now have a set of tools that global leaders, but also regional and local leaders can use to foster the growth that we all need while reducing the climate risks that we all face. This is what we mean by better growth and better climate. This is what we mean by the new climate economy. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, President Calderon. President Calderon is going to have to leave in a little while, but he is going to be available to answer a few questions after our next presentation. And we're now turning to the United States part of the presentation. It's a pleasure to have Nicholas Bianco, the lead author, who is by all means come up here. I also wanted to introduce Jennifer Morgan, who is Director of Climate for climate and energy for the World Resources Institute. And I think everyone knows Kevin Kennedy, head of our US climate practice. Following Nicholas's presentation, we will have brief questions for him and President Calderon. Then we're going to have a panel chaired by Amy Harder of the Wall Street Journal. And I want to introduce one of the panel members now because he was a member of the commission, and you all probably know him, Chad Holliday, the legendary CEO of DuPont, and more recently chair of Bank of America and a great champion in this space. So we look forward to your views later on. Chad, all yours, Nicholas.
Needless to say, President Calderon is not a particularly easy act to follow, but I'll give it a shot. Before I get started, I want to make sure I acknowledge the co-authors on this report who have just done a huge amount of work in order to help get us to this point today, two of which were able to join us in person. We have Kristen Meek and Rebecca Gasper up here in the front. Maybe just wave to everyone. And then, mic's not working so well? Sorry. Tilt it up. All right. How's that? Does that sound better for everyone in the back? Great. So in addition to Kristen Meek and Rebecca Gasper, we had Michael Obuter, Nate Aiden, and Sarah Forbes, who have all done a fantastic job in helping to get this project over the finish line. So to build off of what President Calderon said, the U.S. case study is one of the 5 country studies that we did. And for us, oops, you're going to have to forgive me. It looks like we are at the very end of the slideshow. All right, pretend you can't see what you're seeing. All right, great. So to start at the beginning as opposed to the end, we'll start by saying the U.S. case study was for us an obvious thing to do. The U.S. is the world's largest economy, second largest emitter, and per capita emissions are roughly 3 times the global average. So it was a clear part of the puzzle to help provide some real in-country grounding for some of the work that was done by the Global Commission. And so what we did is, instead of evaluating the full range of things that President Calderon just articulated, that the Global Report did, we went very deep in 5 specific sets of opportunities. Not because these are the only opportunities, but because these are critical opportunities for the U.S. to take advantage of in the years ahead. Those are electricity generation, electric efficiency, making vehicles that are cleaner, more fuel efficient, reducing waste from natural gas systems, and also reducing emissions of high global warming potential hydrofluorocarbons, which are frequently used as refrigerants. Together, these sectors actually account for more than half of emissions from the U.S. economy and are absolutely essential if the U.S. is going to hit its 17% target and get deep reductions in the years that follow. And what we found across all of these sectors is that, 1, we don't have to choose between economic growth and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, many of the activities that we identify here are things that produce direct benefits for American businesses, direct savings for American consumers, and improve public health. Number 2, sustained technological progress continues to create new opportunities. Opportunities not just to reduce emissions, but opportunities for the American economy as a whole. And then 3, policies not just are able to help overcome market barriers to allow the seeds of change we're already seeing take root, grow and magnify, but they're actually essential to do so. So to maybe provide a little bit of context, what I'm going to do in the remaining time that's available to me is I'm going to go deep into 2 of the sectors and then provide some just general high-level findings from the other 3. Deep, of course, in this context is very relative since I have 10 minutes and we have a 140-page document. So certainly we encourage you to read the whole thing, but to give you a sense of what we looked at, I'll get started. So power generation, obviously an essential part of U.S. emissions. This is about 1/3 of the U.S. greenhouse gas inventory. We've seen emissions fall about 15% since 2005, and we've seen signs that a much deeper transformation is taking hold. Now, that may seem counterintuitive to some of you because when many people think about American power generation, we think of coal. And in large part, this is because we historically have built. But when we look at what's been put in place since 1990, we've seen a dramatic shift in new generation, where we see natural gas and renewables just overwhelming any other form of new generation coming into the mix. And a lot of you are probably familiar with why some of this is happening, right? For natural gas, it's really straightforward. It's just basic economics. With low prices of natural gas, new gas is cheaper than new coal. The story for renewables is, however, a bit more complex. We have a suite of programs happening at the state level, state renewable portfolio standards. We have federal tax incentives, but we also have a lot of forward-looking companies that are moving forward with voluntary purchases of renewable energy, the same as with individual consumers. And in part, as a result of the continued support for renewables, today we now see wind and solar are cheaper than coal and gas in a growing number of markets. Now, this is not true everywhere, but we continue to see prices decline and continue to see new opportunities open up. To give you just a sense of how this is playing out on the ground, we see in Michigan, for example, where the Public Service Commission found that new wind is, in fact, 1/2 the price of new coal generation. They're certainly not alone. We see Austin Energy in Texas recently contracting for new solar generation at just 5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is considerably less than what they could have gotten new gas, new coal, or new nuclear. In fact, this project is so cheap that based on our analysis, it looks like it probably would have been competitive even without federal tax credits. And in large part, in particular, this is hopefully just going to be the first of many exciting stories for solar, because prices have declined for solar modules, photovoltaics, by 80% since 2008. We also see some exciting things happening in the wind industry. Now, this is the map that probably most of you are familiar with. This is the map of where wind resources exist in the US using yesterday's technology of turbines about 80 meters hub height. But with today's technology, there's much more of the US that is available for economic wind. The stories are very similar when we look at passenger vehicles. We see here is a sector where, in particular, change has been constant. Vehicles continue to use more and more advanced technologies. The challenge is that since 1980, all of those improvements were going to make vehicles that were more powerful and larger. And it's only been in recent years that we've started to see a shift in in the application of those technologies and those improvements to making vehicles that are more efficient. In part, that's because fuel prices have gone up, but it's also inevitably because of good regulations by the Department of Transportation and EPA. Now, those regulations, the most recent ones, are going to drive vehicles that are twice as efficient in 2025 than what we have on the road today. And it's projected that that will save consumers $3,400 to $5,000 per vehicle that they purchase. And these are incredible savings. And we started to see a shift in the landscape already, where we see a 7-fold increase in the number of vehicles that are achieving 40 miles per gallon of fuel or more. But what's exciting about vehicles is it's not just about getting technologies off of the shelves and into the cars that are sitting in everyone's driveways. It's about the next generation of technologies as well, where we see electric vehicles entering the market at a much faster rate than hybrids ever did over the first 3.5 years of their availability. We see that this has driven, and in part been driven by, a rapid decline in battery prices, 40% over the last 4 years alone. It's expected that they'll fall another 30% as a result of Tesla's new Gigafactory. And what this means is that we're becoming closer and closer to the point at which electric vehicles can be cost competitive with the vehicles that they replace, even without federal tax incentives. But electric vehicles are also not the only technology moving forward. We have 4 vehicle manufacturers that have already announced plans to have fuel cell vehicles on the road by 2017. So this is a sector that's really rapidly changing, and it's happening in part because, or in large part, because of the support that's being provided by a suite of state and federal programs, whether we're talking about fuel economy standards, whether we're talking about state and local support for new charging stations, or also federal tax credits for these new electric vehicles that are really helping make it easier for consumers to take action early on and ultimately allow for these manufacturers to create early markets and to learn by doing to help drive these cost reductions. And so then I'll just breeze through the last 3 sectors and just simply note energy efficiency. This is, I think, a story that all of you have heard time and time again. Certainly, the more efficient you make products, the more you save consumers money. As a result of the suite of programs in place, we've seen a 50 to 80% decline in the energy use by some major appliances over the last couple of decades, but there's still room for improvement. We see that the standards finalized by this administration since 2009 alone can save consumers $450 billion through 2030. And yet we still have states moving forward in an ambitious way to capture all the other opportunities that they see. And we see that time and time again, every dollar that they invest to improving the efficiency of consumer products save consumers $2 to $5. And so while we see this happening on the ground in about 24 states with mandatory programs today, we still don't see it in 26 other states. And so the question is, what does it take in order to really scale this up to provide new opportunities for American consumers? Natural gas systems, another place where we do have a number of companies leading the way. We have new health standards that are helping to drive reductions. But even on top of that, there's opportunities to reduce wasted products, thus reducing methane emissions into the atmosphere and saving industry at least $1.5 billion per year. Hydrofluorocarbons, another area where there's some very exciting trends, in large part because of the leadership taken by a number of U.S. manufacturers such as Honeywell and DuPont. We see the evolution of a brand new suite of chemicals that can come into the marketplace that can allow for significant reductions in emissions of this small but rapidly growing portion of the U.S. inventory, with the possibility of reducing emissions roughly by 40% by 2030, just by technologies that ultimately save consumers money or come at a break-even price alone. So the question is, with all this great stuff happening on the ground already, well, what more is actually needed? How do we take these seeds of change and turn them into much more robust, much more pervasive sets of opportunities? And in the end, the answer is we need more policies, right? There's a suite of market barriers that ultimately get in the way of a lot of these things from moving forward. And so if the U.S. is really going to seize these opportunities and produce real savings for American consumers and businesses and better health savings, we need to create long-term policy certainty for businesses and investors. This is probably no more apparent anywhere than in the power sector, where you have companies that have to make decisions about very long-lived assets, and they need the certainty to make sure that the things that they build today are the things that we actually need tomorrow. Now, this is certainly the easiest way to do is through things like congressional legislation, but it's also something that can be achieved through administrative actions like EPA's Clean Power Plan. Number two, it's essential that we continue to drive technological development through direct investment in R&D, public-private partnerships, competitions, and things of that nature. This is critical. It's worked out really well, for instance, in a lot of energy efficiency technologies, but it's an area that, for instance, we've seen overall public R&D decline 77% in inflation-adjusted dollars since the 80s in the power sector. Now, this is an area that's certainly one of the most important for reducing emissions in the U.S., and that's a staggering reduction. Yet, it's perhaps even more staggering when you consider that the industry only invests 0.05% of its annual revenues in R&D per year. To put that into context, manufacturing, on average in the U.S., invests about 3% of annual revenue in R&D. Pharmaceuticals invest 11%. So these types of partnerships, this type of direct public investment is going to continue to be essential. And then number three, it's important to continue providing better conditions for deployment of new technologies. To put that into context, that means things like providing public support for low-carbon infrastructure like electric vehicle charging stations. It means eliminating regulatory barriers to investment. So for instance, EPA finalizing regulations that will allow for the use of some of the new low global warming potential HFCs that are coming to market. It's a matter of helping investors access low-cost financing options like PACE financing for energy efficiency. And of course, it's about addressing the full cost of pollution so that old polluting industries don't unfairly benefit and are advantaged over cleaner industries at the expense of public health. So in conclusion, number one, I think our findings show that we don't have to choose between economic growth and averting climate change. In fact, the things that we can do to reduce emissions oftentimes produce direct benefits for American consumers, American businesses, and help improve public health. Number two, sustained technological progress continues to create new opportunities, both for reducing emissions and for the American economy. And then number three, policies are not just able to overcome market barriers, but they're actually essential to overcoming market barriers so that the United States can realize a new climate economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Let's take some questions, maybe first from the press. We have President Calderon doesn't have long here, and then Nicholas will answer particular questions on the United States side. There's a question back here. Could we pass the microphone around?
Thank you. Andrew Simmons, urban design consultant, now working for a developer. Great job. Question to Nicholas, actually, about electric vehicles. I won't admit that I'm on the mailing list of the Cato Institute, but they're having a session this week that's titled, very revealingly, something like electric driverless cars, the death of mass transit. So I wanted to ask if you could talk about electric vehicles, EVs, and then compared with, say, urbanization or your city section, which of course promotes compact development in the American market, and what your thoughts on demographic changes are with urban sprawl, et cetera. But looking at sort of a life cycle analysis approach of electric vehicles, is that a solution versus compact urban development? Thanks.
Great, thank you. I tell you what, let's take two or three more, and then we'll cluster them and go to President Calderon first. Yes, there's the question here.
Yes, was this for... Yes, President Calderon, I would just like to ask you if you have in mind what would be the most exciting result that you could imagine from the publication of this new undertaking.
Maybe start on that. That's a good one. President Calderon.
Well, the most important is now we have economic alternatives. Because, in my opinion, and with all respect, following all the arguments on all those battles in favor of taking action against climate change, so far has been very difficult to get through the message. And the argument related with the future, the argument related with the climate itself, the climate change and the catastrophes in the future, probably are not working very much. But now we have economic arguments. And even though the people, all those skeptical people, for even good reasons or interest, whatever, we can talk and discuss about economic alternatives. We can talk not only about carbon emission reductions, tons of carbon, for instance. We can talk now about revenues and profits. We can talk about jobs. We can say that this kind of industry, renewable energy, for instance, is generating more American jobs than a lot of, for instance, the coal industry in this country. And that's are the good news, and more revealing. When my co-chairman, Nicholas Stern, published the very famous Stern report, we were not clear about those alternatives. We had the feeling, and the most powerful argument is taking action is better or not taking action has much more cost than taking action today. That was the strongest argument we had at that time. But today we say we have an economic growth path which is viable. I don't want to say that it's going to be even bigger economic growth. It could be, but I can say it's going to be better economic growth, and that's the good news for me.
That's great. Thank you. Let's take a couple more. Yes, Larry.
So you in your comments, you mentioned the tremendous amount of money that's about to be invested in, energy efficiency, renewing the grid, whatever. How do you plan to make those decisions to allocate that money in the most efficient way?
Yeah. But the point is, the argument is this. So how much money we need to invest, let alone the new climate economy? How much money we need to invest in the next 15 years? In highways, buildings, energy plants, facilities, or whatever. 90 trillion in any case, one way or another. And if we try to move towards a low carbon economy path, the difference could be probably less than 5% of increase in advance, because some of these sectors are capital intensive, yes. But this, like less than around $4 trillion could be offset immediately almost. Just the money we can save the new urban design, for instance, could save that money. Plus the lower costs in the variable cost, for instance, in energy. You can invest a lot, for instance, in a facility of solar photovoltaic plant. However, you have almost zero cost in a permanent basis. And you can offset due to efficiency. So clearly it's a win situation. Of course, it implies important decisions now. There are a lot of issues related with financing these changes, but the right economic incentives coming from the right public policies could provide that incentives. So it is possible to get that money.
Great. Over here.
Want to say about the vehicle?
Hi, what is the role of public opinion in creating this action? In the United States, when you have a vocal and minority, but vocal opposition to even belief in climate change, much less anthropomorphic climate change, is it necessary to have those people on board to continue with these kind of programs or these kind of initiatives, or can you move forward despite, I guess, the knuckle dragging of?
Okay, maybe this is the final question for President Calderon. How did you do it in
well,
Mexico?
we need to win this battle in that field, public opinion. So we need a set of arguments. We have the traditional argument related with science, and we need to be careful about that. This is not a question of faith. So this is not it is not a religious issue about do you believe or not. No? There is science behind that. But that is one part. The other part, which is the new thing about the new climate economy, is the economic arguments. We want to talk about economic argument. Actually, we invite to the other side, let me say that, to debate about the economic arguments. We want to invite people to talk about how many jobs, how many growth we can get, taken this way. And the third, there are all other issues. I don't want to go in advance in security issues, for instance, but it is important to abandon this dependency on fossil fuels in several parts of the world. So we need to battle in the public opinion. If we have not the support of public opinion, the political leaders will not take action. That's pragmatically, that's things used to happen in politics. I have been in politics several years. I'm missing that part of my life. But you need votes. If we are able to mobilize the voters, the next election will be different because the constituents, the voters, play a role in any democracy, and we need to move those voters.
Great. We're going to thank President Calderon now and let him go because I think you've got a plane to catch. And
Thank you.
we're going to.
Congratulations.
Great. Nicholas, take that difficult first question now.
Sure. So to address the EVs versus urbanization, I think the key point to keep in mind, it's not an either-or conversation. It's about doing both. And so the reason we looked at 5 sectors narrowly or 5 opportunities narrowly is not because we thought we were trying to hold them up in contrast to another set of recommendations, but in fact, so that we could just go particularly deep on 5 specific areas in the U.S. economy. So vehicle electrification is an opportunity for the automobile industry, for the American economy. There's been some fantastic trends recently with rapidly declining battery prices. Now, one of the things that will ultimately be essential to really maximizing the benefits of the technology, of course, is going to be producing electricity from an increasingly cleaner grid. And so that can allow for these vehicles to considerably reduce their emissions intensity further still.
Let's just take a couple more questions on the US study, one here, and then one over there.
Okay.
I'll come over there. If you make them brief, we'll take three, and then the answers also will be brief.
Okay, part and parcel of green infrastructure and some of these new technologies are battery technology, as we've mentioned. Where is this investment coming from? What can federal government do to support it? And how do we wrangle with some of the geopolitical and ecological implications of extracting the resources needed to create those batteries in the first place?
And I've just been told we could take one more because Nicholas is actually going to be on the panel later on. Who is next? Yes, here.
Oh, thank you. So I noticed the new climate economy report was calling for a strong, predictable carbon price, and that the WRI US focus report did not. Could you talk to us what the thinking and analysis was behind that decision?
Sure. So I'll start with the second question and then move back to the first. So we actually do have a recommendation in the report. It's very easy to miss because we have a lot of recommendations. Certainly, establishing a clear carbon price is essential. It can provide a very clear signal to investors and can really help on the innovation side, help people understand where it is that we need to go. So absolutely critical. There's lots of ways to do it, certainly one of which is through legislation, but there's also things that can happen administratively as you begin to regulate emissions. So for instance, EPA's Clean Power Plan can send similar types of signals to the power sector while providing lots of flexibility in how people comply. I think the key point, though, of our report is that you need to do more than just establish a price on carbon. And this is true with the global report, is that there's a suite of policies that can really help make any transition easier. If you do it right, if you invest in R&D, if you invest in creating the right type of climate for investment, then you'll start to see a lot of these changes happening cheaper than otherwise would be possible. To come back to the question about battery technology, so certainly one of the things that has been really critical in helping to provide the right signals to investors has been a number of state initiatives, actually, that establish zero-emission vehicle targets, and the support that states and local governments have been providing in establishing that infrastructure. And so moving forward, to scale that up, we're going to continue to need to see states in a leadership role. We're going to need to continue to see things like federal tax incentives in order to help make it easier for consumers to buy these early vehicles while we wait for those prices to rapidly decline as industries learn by doing. In terms of the broader implications of extractive industries, I mean, that's inevitable. It is a critical concern, I think, all of the time when you're speaking in this area, that you have the right suite of policies to ensure that as you try to move forward with one set of opportunities, that you're not creating other problems elsewhere. And we see this in everything, whether we're talking about natural gas, making sure that we have the right support infrastructure so that we're regulating and reducing the emissions from upstream methane emissions, and making sure that we have clean water. So, I mean, this is not unique to electric vehicles. It's actually universal in many regards.
Thank you, Nicholas, very much. Handing over now to Amy Harder, who's going to lead us in a panel discussion. Great to have Ken Geyer here, Vice President of Honeywell, and Chad Holliday. Let's give them a round of applause, eh?
Well, good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. I'm going to dive right in because I know we are all eager to continue the conversation. I'll do brief introductions, although I know you probably know most of these folks. To my immediate left, to your right, is Chad Holliday. Of course, had a great introduction earlier. He is member and immediate former chairman of the board for Bank of America and also former CEO of DuPont. So he has had his hands in these industries from a couple of different angles. To his left is Ken Gayer, Vice President and General Manager of Fluorine Products and at Honeywell International. He's been with the company in various positions since 1999. And then we have, of course, Andrew Steer, the President and CEO of WRI, and also before this, he was the Special Envoy for Climate Change at the World Bank. So I'm interested in getting his perspectives wearing that hat of yours. And I want to talk about some big picture questions and then delve into the report a little bit and then kind of go back out to some of the interesting political challenges around this issue. Chad, let me start with you. Sustainability has always been a big part of your vision of business. But what do you think is the biggest thing holding back companies in general, especially the energy intensive ones that are extracting the energy out of this country and around the world, from holding them back from being more forward-thinking on this issue?
So a great question to start us off with. I think if you look at the cost of non-action of the last 5 years, it hasn't been that great. As you saw from Nicholas's charts, the costs have been coming down. Inflation has been relatively low. So if I waited 3 years to make these investments, I was probably all right. I think what our report shows is that we could be at an inflection point, because now the economics, it is the economy and climate. We start with economy. And so I think what we've shown in this report, which is very unique, is it does make good economic sense. I think we've come so far down the cost curve, it will continue, but this is a really good spot to get in. And I think companies are just going to have to stop and look at their decisions and really look at the market, a much bigger market opportunity. I think for the U.S., if I was going to write your report again, Nicholas, I'd say this is the biggest market opportunity, and the U.S. is primed to take it, and shame on us for missing it.
Do you think it's too late?
No, it's just perfect. No, I think we're at the right time. And I do think this will be, the governments need to do all they're going to do, all that stuff. This will be business-led. And I think because there's market opportunities, it's the biggest market that's going to open up in the lifetime of anybody in this room, and why not take advantage of it?
Ken, a question for you. So you all are probably aware of the recent announcement by the Obama administration to clamp down on hydrofluorocarbons, of course, potent greenhouse gas, and Honeywell was one of the companies that pledged to increase production of products made from without these greenhouse gases. Do you think these partnerships could be a catalyst for broader action on climate change? Or do you think this is the ceiling at which the administration and private companies can collaborate on in this area?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, absolutely, this type of thing could be a catalyst for broader change around climate and probably other difficult issues to overcome. What we saw with this recent announcement that was made by the White House in September to take more action on climate, even leading up to that, a lot more inquiries from customers that had been staying on the sideline, that were just kind of in this mode, as Mr. Holliday was saying, where it's just easy to do nothing. Even the possibility of upcoming regulations spurs some of these sideline customers to action. So that's one thing. It definitely generates innovation, activity, investment, and job growth as well. And there's many other examples of well-designed policy. This concept was replete throughout the WRI report, where well-designed policy can overcome a lot of the barriers. And another example that actually hits this climate space is the cooperation between EPA and the Department of Transportation on credits that auto manufacturers get towards their CAFE requirements if they adopt a lower global warming refrigerant in their cars. So that makes it a lot easier. And on a voluntary basis, we're seeing half of the U.S. auto industry shift to these lower global warming alternatives. So absolutely, this could be a catalyst.
Andrew, from both your current position and also your previous hat at the World Bank, how have you noticed companies' involvement and awareness of reports and just the issue of climate change in general evolve over the last several years? do you see us reaching a point where there's this groundswell of support in the business community, or do you think we're still lacking a lot of support from that area?
Oh, I think as the previous two speakers have both said, I mean, I think there's quite a lot of evidence that we may be at an inflection point. I mean, 2 weeks ago, more than 1,000 companies in New York at the climate summit signed up to a statement saying, we believe there should be a price on carbon. That simply wouldn't have happened 2 years ago. Quite remarkable. One of the things that Chad Holliday does is chair something called Sustainable Energy for All, which is a global initiative to double the rate of energy efficiency, double the amount of renewable energy in the world, and bring electricity to every single human being by 2030. And the really interesting thing is not so much all the governments in it, although that's pretty good, it's the private sector that are coming and saying, actually, we want to be part of a compact with countries to really sort of move this forward. So absolutely, I think that absolutely is right. One thing that needs to be mentioned, though, is that in this, even although the analysis shows it's good for the economy overall, it's good for citizens overall, that doesn't mean that every single company in every single situation, that's where the politics come in.
At what point do you think this involvement and pressure from the private sector could impact public policy? And does there need to be a certain amount of private pressure to get the U.S. government to, say, pass a climate legislation, or do you think EPA regulations are sufficient? I suppose I'll direct that question to Chad, although any of you feel free to answer.
So I think one of the stumbling blocks has been financing, having the cash available to do this. And I think you could rightly criticize financial service institutions for not putting the right vehicles in place. I think that's changed drastically. Look at green bonds, which is a bond a company could issue for sustainability. 5 years ago, there were $3 billion issued. This year, if we stay on track, it'll be $40 billion issued. That's because of demand. If you look at yield coals, which is an equity instrument for investment, a good friend of mine, the CEO of a major solar company, says the biggest change in the solar industry in the last 20 years, and you've seen what the cost has come down. So I think what we're seeing is financing is different. People are jumping into this because there's opportunity. At Bank of America, I started kneeling around, pushing them to kind of look at this stuff, and they were kind of pushing back. And I got one of my good friends to be assigned to it, and he said, why'd you get me this terrible job? And then he comes back and says, I think there's something here. And Bank of America announced last week putting $1 billion in the game, challenged 9 other major banks to put $1 billion in the game, in a way to leverage that up to $120 billion in investment. So I think what we're seeing from the financial side, the money's coming, the technology's already been there, so I think we're getting close.
But what about we talk about this inflection point in the climate change debate, but we're also in an inflection point in the oil and natural gas boom here in the U.S. And so I've participated in a lot of discussions like this, and I often see conversations about the energy boom and then conversations about climate change. But what's really important is to have a conversation about both of them. So what challenges do you see in making progress on climate when the U.S. is now the world's biggest producer of both oil and natural gas, and we're seeing unconventional production in all different parts of the world? I mean, do you think that makes it harder, or do you think natural gas, emitting half the carbon emissions as coal helps the problem? How do you see this being a challenge or an opportunity?
Well, certainly it's an economic opportunity in the short run, and we believe that natural gas actually is a very useful bridge. If managed well, it has emissions of about 50% of what coal would have. But at the same time, if you leak maybe 2 to 3%, that's all you have to leak, it actually is worse than coal for greenhouse gases because of methane. So the most important thing to do right now is to pass legislation and have voluntary action as well to cap methane leakage. Without that, we should not kid ourselves that this is a benefit to the environment at all. But look, you're absolutely right. This needs to be looked at in an integrated way. If you talk to, for example, Helge Lund, who's the CEO of Statoil, which is a very large Norwegian company, He says, we're in favor of a carbon tax. We've been operating under one in Norway for $80 for the last 15 years. He said, absolutely, we should. I mean, it's interesting that I think you're also on the board of Shell. Shell signed up to this agreement 2 weeks ago, calling for a price on carbon. So these are potentially important trends.
So you could call natural gas the solution, a bridge, or an exit road off coal. You can call all the. It doesn't make a lot of difference what you call it. Andrew's exactly right. We need to get this methane leaks fixed, but that's technically doable. It's just a matter of taking step. I would add carbon capture and storage because once we develop that technology and can effectively do that, the next question will be carbon capture and utilization. Once we can effectively capture it, we'll find something to do with it. So I think those are real opportunities for the U.S. to lead. And so I actually think the natural gas boom here is a reason to surge ahead in all these areas, not just natural gas.
Ken, let me turn to you. Do you think that we reached a point where private companies either can't or won't do more without the federal government either mandating it or incentivizing it to do more in this area?
Yeah, Honeywell's view on this is that companies are always going to innovate and invest. And in fact, we started our investment program on these low global warming alternatives over a decade ago, before a lot of these regulations were even on the horizon. We're always going to see that. The issue is scale, as President Calderon mentioned in his remarks, is that without the action from government, you don't get the scale. But I think we'll continue to see innovation and niche adoption, and what we see also is companies come up with a low global warming solution, and then they have that shelf ready so that if there is a reg, they'll launch it. And typically there's a few leaders. We see that with Whirlpool, for example, a large appliance manufacturer is adopting these low global warming solutions ahead of regs. We see that with General Motors in automobiles. So I think you're going to have adoption, but to get the scale, you really need some regulation. It really helps.
Do EPA regulations fit that bill?
Yeah, absolutely. We fully support what the EPA is doing, where they're using their authority under the Clean Air Act to deal with things that potentially could be done by Congress.
Let me ask a couple of questions on the report itself. What are one or two recommendations from that report that you think are kind of getting less attention and perhaps is a great business opportunity, that a lot of people might be missing? And I guess I'll direct that to Ken and Chad.
Yeah, so I'll start first. One of the recommendations is inclusion of HFCs, these hydrofluorocarbons, potent greenhouse gases, tens of thousands of times higher than carbon dioxide, including those in the Montreal Protocol. The Montreal Protocol is, beyond any doubt, one of the most successful international collaborations ever. They have a great framework for dealing with these kind of gases as they help to fix this ozone depletion problem over the past few decades. So including HFCs in the Montreal Protocol makes a lot of sense. Absent that, what EPA is doing with their SNAP, their significant new alternatives policy, de-snapping or delisting some of these high global warmers makes a lot of sense and helps a lot.
I think I was in Japan this week and looking at their process to go to hydrogen vehicles, which was discussed in the report. And I was very impressed to see the Prime Minister saying we're going to adopt this across the government, hydrogen vehicles. And I was challenging MIDI and the Ministry of Finance. Are you sure you guys know what you're doing? This is a big bowl. It's different. And they laid out the total system for me and just gave one piece of data that really moved me. A Prius can power 40 homes for 4 hours if you feed it back into the grid. So what they said, what we're creating is a gigantic storage system because that hydrogen vehicle has a big battery, So I never really thought about it from a total system standpoint like that before, and they have, and they're doing it. And so I think we could look at what kind of systems like that comes out of the report, because that's why it's comprehensive. It's not just one thing, but the total system could make a big difference.
Andrew, let me turn to you. How do recommendations like what you've put forth in this report fit into the global context of climate change? Many experts maintain that what's really needed is just a global price on carbon and everything else is window dressing. So what's your response to those people that just keep pounding that drum of needing a global climate deal and global price on carbon?
Well, look, we do need a global deal next year in Paris. And one of the reasons we need it is that actually it'll be good for business. Because currently, at the moment, businesses do not know which side to go. They know that probably, given that 97% of scientists are in the same place on the dangers of climate change, they know that probably 10 years from now there's going to be a serious price on carbon, but they're not sure of that. So they actually haven't a clue, should I invest here or here, high or low carbon? And so actually a good deal next year will be very pro-business, especially those that have to make big decisions. But the point of this report is that it is smart economics today within the United States to move forward with or without a deal. And as Nicholas said and President Calderon said, the United States has obviously a massive leadership role to play. No other country on the planet has the ability to do the research and the technological innovation that the United States is and can do. And so that's the point, is that yes, there needs to be a deal, but actually even before the deal and without a deal, this makes sense. And just one final point, I mean, there is a school of thought that says, oh, you don't want to regulate things, you don't want to put taxes on them, because that actually will be distortionary for the economy. It'll distort, it'll slow down growth. That's just a failure to understand economics. I mean, since 1923, when Professor Pigou taught us about the economics of externalities, we've known that not to price externalities is bad economics. So failing to put a price on carbon is bad economics, is bad for capitalism. How much longer are we going to tax good things like work and profits when we could be taxing bad things, which would be good economics, such as carbon emissions and pollution and congestion?
And also, please be thinking of questions, because I'm going to turn it over to you here in a few minutes for some Q&A, and we'll bring Nicholas back up as well. But a couple more questions from me, and this one is to you, Chad. Two related questions. We've seen this movement in the environmental community to target universities and foundations to try to get them to divest from fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, and coal, and they've had varying success on that. Of course, Bank of America several years ago has gotten criticism for its investment in the coal sector, and you've certainly made strides in the other direction. Can you update us on where Bank of America's mindset is on this issue? And on the divestment campaign issue, do you see that gaining momentum, and do you see that as an effective way to move the needle?
So I think if you look at the report, what it clearly says is fossil fuels are going to be a part of the equation for some time to come. My guess is everybody in this room is going to use a fossil fuel one way or another before the day's out. So I think I'd be careful about just trying to stop them all tomorrow. But the reports clearly said coal is a much higher risk actor than natural gas, especially with carbon capture and storage. So if I was thinking about my investment portfolio, I would be more discriminating than thinking about fossil fuels overall. The big thing people should be asking for is give me those investment instruments so I can invest in a yield code that has a blended set of sustainable solutions. And I think if you wanted to use your investment money effectively, demand financial services institutions give you those options. And I think that's what's happening. I think you're going to see a lot of those options flow out in the next 2 years.
Do you think the divestment campaign, though, is an effective strategy?
Look, that would be for them to make their decision. I was very clear in answering your first question. I think to blanketly just stop all fossil fuels is not very smart. But I think if you were selective in what you're doing, I think it makes a lot more sense in going forward.
I would be remiss not to mention Congress as we're sitting here in Washington. But Congress has been increasingly irrelevant on these issues the last several years. How important do you think Congress is in addressing this issue? I mean, we had a question from the audience about those lawmakers who either don't, who deny the science or don't want to comment on the science but say it's too big of a problem to address, or XYZ. I mean, how important do you think is Congress in action on this issue, and do you think congressional action is necessary to really address this issue?
A very senior official at DOE, when I asked him that question, responded this way. He said, look how the cost has come down. Nicholas's report, and the report shows that graphically. Look at the weird weather. That was his term, not mine. But I think you can't argue about the weird weather. And then he said a policy nudge. And I think he was so right, because we talk about, if you talk about massive policy shifts, that's a lot harder for Congress to deal with. But just a little nudge, I think for the creativity of American industry, we would just jump at that and leap forward.
And what's a nudge, exactly?
A little touch.
But what kind of policy does that mean?
It's what Andrew said earlier. It's anything to say the direction's going this way. We're not going backwards. And then the U.S. is so good at getting ahead of the curve once we know where the direction's going. So I don't think it takes a massive tax, to be example, to get things moving.
Carbon tax.
Carbon tax, but just I think in getting that's where Congress could get very creative about what are things they could do directly or indirectly that would send a message to industry. And I think you'd see companies like Honeywell and others just move like crazy. They're already moving.
Do you think EPA is that nudge? I mean, that's not really Congress, but back in, when the Clean Air Act was created and amended, it was Congress. So do you think that's the nudge that's sufficient?
Well, so if it works, Congress can take credit because they did the Clean Air Act, right? So I think that's an example. That's a great example of a nudge, but it probably needs more than that to finally get us over the goal line.
Do either of you have any comments about the role or lack thereof of what Congress can do here?
Well, we've spent a lot of time, Nicholas and the whole climate team, analyzing what we call existing authority, how far you can get. We brought out an important report last year that said, can the U.S. get there from here under existing presidential authority? And it turned out, yes, you can get to 2020, you can get the 17% reduction. And actually, you can get quite a lot of progress throughout the 2020s as well. But it would be much better if we took sort of one arm from behind our backs and said, actually, we ought to be looking at all the instruments available and choosing the most cost-effective instrument, which may be a price on carbon, maybe a cap and trade, maybe all kinds of things that the Congress and the administration together could actually move this forward. So as we go into the 2020s, whoever is the administration has the authority under existing law to do all kinds of things that would move us in the right direction. But as you get further and further into the reduction in carbon, it becomes more expensive unless you use all of the instruments, and some of those instruments are only in the hands of Congress.
Great. One question, and then we'll go to the audience. I want to quickly ask about your prognosis for the Paris talks next year, which I think is the most important thing going on right now in our space, even more important than the midterm elections. Can you talk about what you guys will be watching in those, from a business perspective and from your perspective, Andrew, about what are the one or two things that you'll be hoping will come out of there, aside from some sort of deal?
Well, we're much, much more optimistic than we would have been 2 years ago. Interestingly, today in Washington, D.C., finance ministers are meeting on the subject of climate change and on the subject of putting a price on carbon, for example. Now, quite frankly, that wasn't happening. I mean, 2 weeks ago, 76 countries, governments, in addition to the 1,000 corporations, signed up to say we believe there needs to be a price on carbon. Today, 100 million Chinese are under a price on carbon, rising rapidly, and it'll be over 1 billion in 3 years. So things are moving in the right direction. So we're much more optimistic. Maybe in the question when we go into the broader question, we could call on Jennifer, who works on this daily. But for example, Christiana Figueres is here today as well. We'll be meeting her later, putting the different blocks in place. It won't be your sort of textbook global treaty that we were hoping for moving into Copenhagen. It won't be like, okay, so we're allowed to emit this much greenhouse gases, let's divide it up and allocate it to countries and have a global treaty, and if you don't honor that treaty, you get sent to prison kind of thing. That's not what it'll be. It'll be much more creative than that. But it still can get us to the 2 degrees. But by the way, we're not on the right path now at all. We're heading in the wrong direction. So we really need to raise our game in the next 14 months to get to where we need to get to.
I think if you go back in time a bit, and when we eliminated CFCs, not HCFCs, it took companies that said we can do this and not kill the economy and create jobs, that gave people the courage to make the Montreal Protocol a reality. I think if we could take this report and we'd have 10 major companies step up and say we can make this a success, we can create jobs, we can grow our business by doing this, I think I'd give a lot of momentum going into Paris.
Ken, do you have any comments about to the degree you're paying
we're
paying
looking
attention?
forward. We're looking forward to seeing the HFCs included in the Montreal Protocol. I think we're making progress in that direction. It's the question has been, and this is a pretty public one, what's India going to do? We're encouraged by the meeting that President Obama and Prime Minister Modi had a few weeks ago on this topic. Just to see President Obama, President Xi Jinping from China, Mr. Modi from India talking about HFCs is encouraging, and I think we're making progress towards including these.
Although he did say to the media that they're not going to be reducing carbon emissions for the next 30 years. So that's also a bit of negative news. But on that negative note, I would love to take it to the audience for some questions. And Nicholas, if you want to come back up. And please identify who you are and if your question is for any particular person. And I think we have mics going around. So right there.
I'm Karen Florini with Environmental Defense Fund, but for the purposes of this question, I'm a magic genie, and I have the power to grant you, each of you on the panel, including the moderator, a single wish relating to policy, technology, finance, what have you, on the climate sphere that you think would really help make a difference. What is your wish? And by the way, if you try to jam a whole bunch of things into a compound wish, I will get mad and not grant you your wish.
I think I'll go last. And I have that power as the moderator. So, Chad, you can go first.
I think if you're talking about the U.S., you need a policy nudge. You need something that says the direction's there. A simple thing to do is the government, take a lot of decisions they could do inside themselves. The way OMB, procures things, it doesn't take things into account. That would be one policy nudge, but it's got to be some policy nudge, and then get out of the way. Don't over-regulate it once we start moving.
The question was not intended to be restricted to the United States, by the way.
Yeah, same answer.
Ken?
Yeah, so I'll drop this Montreal Protocol thing now because I've kind of hit that a couple of times. But with respect to the United States, again, we'd like to see the EPA follow through on these actions that they're taking under the Clean Air Act to delist certain of these high global warming compounds. Great progress being made. EPA needs to stay the course and get this done.
Andrew?
Well, obviously they should read this report, internalize it, implement it. But here's an idea. If we could change democracy so you not only got to vote for yourself, but every mother got to vote for her children and her grandchildren, we would have a deal on climate within a year that would be spectacular. Because if you actually care about your children, we don't need to be here today.
We're going to be having a lot of more children, I think.
Exactly. That's right.
Overpopulation problem, then.
So I'll focus more particularly on the U.S. and say I think one of the most important things that can be done in the coming years is to finalize ambitious standards for the power sector through EPA's Clean Power Plan. This is a huge opportunity for the U.S. to both demonstrate global leadership and to start realizing real opportunities here at home, to provide certainty for power companies that have to make decisions in the coming years about how to comply with a wide range of new standards for mercury, SO2, and NOx. And so they need the financial certainty. And I think perhaps most importantly, one of the benefits of these regulations is that they can help the U.S. get started. And I think once the U.S. gets started, we'll find that this is actually much easier than what people really think. This is certainly what the experience on the ground has been. We look at the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative as a result of the first 3 years of that program, which caps CO2 emissions from the power sector. They saw a 1.1 billion reduction in electricity bills for consumers. They see a 1.6 billion stimulus to the economy as a result of the investments that were made over those first 3 years. So if the rest of the country can start realizing those benefits, and I think the rest of this is going to start to get a whole lot easier.
Well, my wish would be for functional politics, which is inherently impossible. I thought the other day, what would life be like without politics? And just think about that for one moment, and it's impossible to think about. It's like the sun not coming up. But that would be my wish. And I would love to take another question now. Over here.
Corbin Heyer, SNL Energy. So sort of a follow-up question in terms of congressional inaction. A question about sort of the viability of the recommendations in the report. So in addition to Congress not doing a whole lot, there's a lot of vested interests that are actively opposed to many of the recommendations that are made. You know, Shell in Norway might be okay with a carbon price, but Koch Industries, coal companies, coal-fired utilities are less, and so are the political groups that they sponsor. So, you know, how viable are the recommendations taking into account those factors?
So I think that's a great question. Ultimately, one of the things that we've tried to do with our recommendations is provide a suite of tools that could be used by a variety of different levels of government, whether it's tools for city leaders, for state governors, whether it's tools for federal agencies or Congress. There's something in there for everyone. Now, each of those tools, each of these policy recommendations are going to be more viable in some areas than others, certainly initially. But what our hope is, ultimately, is that enough of them begin to take hold in enough places that you begin to shift those dynamics as more people realize those opportunities.
I would be interested in Chad's answer to that question.
Yeah, I think there is so much low-hanging fruit. Energy efficiency, for one. Nicholas has talked like 2-to-1 payoff. There's so much stuff you could do locally to make that more effective. If I had to make a prediction, we'll be talking 5 years from now that energy efficiency was the next shale gas, because I think it has that kind of potential. I would not sit around and wait on Congress. I think companies have to lead, industries have to lead, and then Congress will catch up once we get there. And so this report says the economy makes sense now. I really believe it.
Do we have another question right here?
I'm Terry Hill with the Passive House Institute. If you build or retrofit buildings to this standard, you save 90% energy on heating and cooling. You put direct current inside that envelope and solar on the roof, and you've dramatically changed the nature of the utilities business model. Who's talking about the generation capacity inherent in existing buildings and deep energy retrofits?
Sure. So deep energy retrofits are essential. There's lots of opportunity in the existing building stock, and it's essential to really get the retrofits there because, as everyone here knows, buildings stick around for an awful long period of time, so you can't just rely on new standards. But what you'll see, I think, if you have a chance to look at the report, is we have a whole suite of policies that we recommend to help get at the opportunity in buildings, everything from providing better information to consumers, particularly that are making purchasing decisions, things related to helping to ensure that mortgages have the ability to reflect the energy efficiency of the buildings that they're covering. And so I think there is a lot of that opportunity, and it's going to be essential that we capture it in a meaningful way.
Great. Another question right here.
Hi, this is Manjot Bhan from the United Nations Environment Program, and I have a question for the whole panel. So every country is in a different level of development, and as the different 5 case studies show that every country will have different goals to reach with different capacities. But I wonder, what does it imply for global multinational companies that have supply chains across the globe? How would they operate in an environment where there are different regulations or different voluntary programs that are more national than global?
Maybe Ken, you can answer that?
Yeah, I can certainly start on this one. The products that we offer in many instances offer significant benefits to the users beyond the fact that they have the lower climate impact. So in many instances, we're seeing adoption just on a standalone basis without the need for any government action. That's not an across-the-board solution, but some of our fastest growth for these products, for example, is in China. The products are used domestically and also exported to some of the attractive export markets. Where you don't have that kind of an export opportunity, we are seeing adoption just for energy savings purposes. That energy savings tends to carry the day a lot in our sector with the HFCs.
Great. Another question? I think right here.
Hi, my name is Seth Collins. I'm with the Climate Investment Funds at the World Bank. I was just going to ask, we talked a little bit about, India's energy growth and the idea that they're not going to be implementing a lot of changes. In general, you see a lot of World Bank projections saying that Southeast Asia and that region is going to be the primary hub of energy growth in the next 50 years. When we're saying that there's going to be this strong push of knowledge and technologies in the U.S. and in kind of the Western Hemisphere, beyond just the idea of these being market opportunities, how do we ensure that that knowledge and infrastructure is getting transferred to areas where you can get a little bit ahead of the curve?
The UN has this program called Sustainable Energy for All that Andrew and I work on, and that's our goal. We want to bring electricity to 1.3 billion people that don't have it. We want to take the 2.6 billion people that are cooking on a cook stove that's going to kill them. And we're going to bring technology available to make that difference. And since we're working on energy efficiency or renewables at the same time, we implant those everywhere that makes sense. And it won't be perfectly green every time when we're going into Sierra Leone, but we're going to make a lot of progress. And so this program with 72 countries now on board is really making a difference. So that was an unsolicited ad. So.
We had a question over here.
Jennifer Kiefer with David Gardner and Associates, and I had just a quick question for Nicholas. I'm pleased to see that energy efficiency is one of the cornerstones of the report and the recommendations. And it seemed like from the opening remarks that when you were talking about energy efficiency, it was in reference to kind of demand-side management, I think things like light bulbs and insulation. And I'm wondering to what extent you also considered supply-side energy efficiency in the form of combined heat and power, which has these economic and competitiveness benefits, the climate benefits, and then also some kind of unquantifiable benefits in terms of reliability and resilience in responding to climate change.
So this particular report does not look at combined heat and power, but this is something that institutionally we've been looking at for a while now, and it's clearly going to be an important opportunity because it allows you to capture a whole lot of the wasted energy that otherwise doesn't go to any purposes and is therefore a huge conservation opportunity. So certainly an important part of the future, but not directly considered in this particular report.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Do we have any right there?
Hi, thank you all for joining us. Rafael Grillo, Environmental Defense Fund. So there's a lot of talk about the need for continued research and development, and I think there's a need to balance both incentives for R&D as in renewable energy as well as incentives for diffusion of said technology. I was wondering if there were any opinions on intellectual property law reform with regards to this matter. Thank you.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think let's go back to the CFC phase out Montreal Protocol. With a date certain, 5 years, you got to be there. What you found is the industry realized they could not get an extended patent battles, so everybody cross-licensed everybody, free of charge. And so it was the date certain that created that. So I think whatever we can do to create date certains, you'll find industry will cross-license very fast anybody in the world to make it work.
Great. And one last question? If you don't have any questions, I certainly have one or two. I just want one quick question, not to bring it back to something a little bit political, but a lot of the focus on climate change here in the U.S. is on the Keystone XL pipeline and not on the EPA regulations, which represent certainly the more substantive impact on the issue. How do you think the debate should change around Keystone, and do you think it's been a wrong thing to focus on so much in the environmental movement? Maybe Chad, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, I think pipelines serve a very useful purpose. We have a lot of them, and so I think the debate's really not about this pipeline. It's about the bigger question, and we'd be better off for educating the public if we talked about the bigger question and not about a pipeline.
Do you think the pipeline should be built?
Yes.
And Andrew, can you quickly respond to that concern about focusing on that issue? in addition to EPA or instead of?
Oh, I think different groups have different sort of ways of trying to influence the debate, and some believe that going after one sort of fairly iconic project will sort of maybe shift the debate. The World Resource Institute chooses to devote our time to basically what we're talking about today, which is demonstrating that actually it is in the interest of the United States to be a leader in this space, because it's going to be great for citizens and great for the economy. And so that's where we devote our time to. We basically don't bring our opinions to things. So we give our recommendations only after a lot of analysis. We have not done deep analysis on the Keystone.
So I want to ask a very quick question to each of you, and please only respond with a percentage point. How likely do you think it is that we'll get some sort of significant global deal out of the Paris talks next year? And no elaboration, just the percentage.
Whatever the deal is, it will be significant.
But that's not answering the question. So is that 60%, 70%?
Will it be significantly good? 70, Jennifer, 75? 75%.
And this is a question for everyone. Chad, what's your handicap?
I think it's above 50%.
That's close enough. What about you, Ken?
Yeah, like I said, we're seeing progress, but then you kind of refuted it with the other point about India not reducing. But on the HFC space, we are seeing progress. I think probably better than 50%. We'll see something in the HFC area.
And what about you, Nick?
My vote goes to Andrew's number.
And with that, I would like to turn it over to Andrew for some concluding remarks.
No, well, look, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Amy. What a great panel this is. Look, I mean, the battle should be over for the science, as President Calderon said. What's to play for now is the battle for what's good for citizens of a nation. And this report, the US report and the global report, is basically trying to take that debate forward. And people like Chad and the other commissioners have really spent the last 15 months absolutely sort of wrestling this thing to the ground, bringing unbiased opinions. The economic panel that advised the global report has 2 Nobel Prize winners and some of the best growth economists in the world on it. None of them are particularly environmental, except potentially, I guess, Lord Nicholas Stern, but the others don't have a great... And it was precisely to bring the sharp pencil of sort of modern economic and financial and business analysis to this. And that's why this is so significant. And what we've tried to do in this report is really to demonstrate that in the United States, perhaps even more than other countries, there are opportunities which are huge. And the art of good politics is when something is good for your nation as a whole, it's figuring out how to get the various constituencies in the right place. That distinguishes a good politician from an ordinary politician. And so what we're really hoping is that there will be a sort of a shift here going on. And key to that shift will be the kind of business leaders we have here today, whereby businesses stand up, as certainly these 2 gentlemen, and I'm sure your newspaper will too, Amy, and will say, for heaven's sake, you know, the writing's on the wall here, let's get on with it. The world is full of problems that seem to be insoluble. You remember just 20, 30 years ago, crime in New York City? How on earth are we going to deal with it? Just think of the crises that we have faced up to. When I started my professional life, virtually every country in the world had distortionary capital controls, trade controls, and so on. Everyone said it's impossible because vested interests are so great. In a 15-year space between 1985 and the year 2000, almost all of those were taken away. We had a quantum shift in the way that economies and trade has run. So it can happen, and it will happen here. The question is, will it happen quickly enough? And we all have a role to play in making that happen. We're going to be bringing out another report in December that will look at the United States, taking all of these ideas and then doing some quite sophisticated economic modeling, looking at different models and what they show for the overall macro So wait for that too. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Amy.
And I would love to thank the panelists, and let's give them a round of applause.